Welcome to Between Authors. I'm your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that author or book that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt for a reader. The goal from my podcast is to bring to you either those authors or those books that you may never have found, but may be the treasure you've been hunting for all along. Today on episode 56, I bring to you author N. Slater. We're going to go over a little bit about who she is, what she's published, what she's working on, and maybe what her plans are for the future. Welcome to the show, Anne.
Hello.
Hello, happy to have you here today. Why don't you begin by giving an introduction to you to the viewers?
So I go by either Nick or Slater, and Slater, either of those. I've been writing since I was about 5 years old. It's always been a dream of mine. However, somewhere along the way, I went to school for chemistry and then decided I wanted to get back into the writing. So I've made it more of my goal in the last couple of years. I am a chaos writer. I write all the time. If I'm not playing with my 3 dogs, I am writing some kind of story or 3 at a time.
Okay. It's interesting because I'm just the same way. I mean, I'm much older than you, but I was always writing since I was little. Loved it, right? For me, probably similar to you, it's like my therapy to be able to sit there and just write anything, right? Poetry's always been a big thing, but just writing anything in general. And, it's kind of the same thing because life starts happening, right? Schooling, work. And at some point you go, I got to get back into this. And then a lot of us come back into this and do this really as a passion project, right? And we're doing it when we have the time, when we can find the time, which always makes it very interesting.
Yeah.
Why don't you let the viewers know too, like what influences you, right? And it doesn't have to necessarily be authors and books. It could be music, it could be art, it could be movies.
I definitely have to say the biggest influence, although she's not allowed to read any of my stuff now, is my mom. She, from the first time I experienced the love for writing, there was never a time she told me no, that I can't, that something is outside of my reach. And then by the time I got to 6th grade, my English teacher took an interest. That's when I got my first short story published. And I was like, ooh, really like seeing my name in print. This is something I really want to go do. As of now, a lot of my influences just come from everyday life and seeing those found family values between a lot of my friends and their parents and kids and all of the extended families and stuff like that. And I just kind of wanted to recreate that, but in books of different worlds.
Yeah, it's very important and it's very interesting, the support system, especially really for everything, but it really is important for writers, right? Because like I said, especially indie authors or self-publishing authors, it's something that's not your full-time, right? Because most of us have a full-time job, and like I said, we do this in the evening, on our lunch, on the weekends, where we can find the time to do all this. And the support's very, very appreciated, right? And it gives you sometimes, because it's tough sometimes to find the time, find the energy to keep going. And we do it because we love it. But even when you love something, sometimes it's tough, right? Because you're just always having to go. And having that support system from a young age and even to today, when somebody like supports your work or lets you know to keep going and do what you love and do what you enjoy, it's much bigger than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So what genre would you say you write in, or are you kind of back and forth in terms of genres?
So I will write almost anything in romance. I haven't really done anything in sci-fi or historical, but I've kind of jumped around all of the other ones. My main pairings, though, are Why Choose with MM or an all-male polycule cast.
Okay. So I know we talked a little bit about this before the podcast started, but you have, I believe, you said about 15 books. So we won't be able to go all of them in depth. So how would you like to do it? Do you want to kind of talk about an overall feel for what you write in your books? Or if you want, you can do that and then narrow it down maybe to one or two that you really want to talk about or really want to get out there.
Yeah, I can do like an overview and then go into like one or two. So my main themes in all of my books, regardless of the pairings, are usually found family, hurt, comfort, and communication. I grew up with a lot of it with my family, and I love seeing that in between the individuals in the polycule. Um, I also love putting out that regardless of gender or sexuality, you can have feelings and you can work through them, and that leaning on and depending on other people is not a problem. Um, there's also a lot of traumatic things that I will put in there. Just having characters work through them because I've done it or I've watched some of my friends do it, and having stories that deal with it and watching characters grow helps me. But also I love being able to help other readers enjoy their reading, but also see characters go through similar experiences and still, get that happy ending. One of the ones that I'm working on right now that comes out April 4th is called Mocha Kisses, and it follows an editor who's been running from her creditors based on her father's bad loan, and she ends up back home with her high school sweetheart, her sweetheart's lawyer, and like one of the cafe owners. There's a lot of growing, building, trying to navigate three relationships instead of just one, but also figuring out a dynamic that works for everyone.
Okay. Are you? Do you find yourself? There's the two terms, plotter or pantser, but a lot of us are either a mixture or lean heavily to one side. Do you find yourself consistently writing a certain way, or do you depends kind of on the storyline and as you start going into it?
I forget which one's which.
So plotter is basically you outline everything at the start and you kind of follow your outline. Pantser is you just go in there and just start writing, and you maybe have it a little bit in your head, but you don't really have it planned out. You're just kind of going at it and writing it as it goes.
I'm 100% a pantser. We sit down, we write tonight. Oh, they don't want to talk. That's fine. Let's try a different story. Let's see what's going on. Oh, that's what's happening. Great. Excellent. And then, half the times the twists that are in my stories, I didn't know they were coming when I first started it. Yeah. That's just what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I'm really more of a pantser as well, but it's very interesting when you let that story organically grow on its own, because it will, right? Mm-hmm. And I can't function in the plotter side. I can't do a outline and kind of follow it because I feel the story is always going to change, right? Because your characters change in the story. Like you said, there's traumatic events or they meet new individuals that weren't part of their life before. So that character is not the same, right? Because they've changed, they've grown or they've taken a different path because of those events. So I never can understand how you can plot it at the beginning and follow that, from beginning to end, because your characters are changing along the way. So I couldn't ever do it. It's always curious when I ask how other authors are doing it or writing.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially because some of the twists that I will put in my stories aren't something that could be plotted. Yeah. Like I couldn't just randomly go into left field with a lot of the twists that I have. They just have to happen. And sometimes it's literally I'm staring at something. I'm like, oh, goodness, I can do this. Yeah. And like that's not going to happen if I had plotted it before and felt like I had to follow it.
Yeah.
Do you find that you write, because again, this is always interesting to me. Do you write your story chronologically? Do you write from beginning to end, or do you find yourself occasionally jumping around as, like you say, as something comes to mind that you may need to set up for a later event or something? Do you find yourself hopping around?
So if I am at my computer, I will write chronologically only because that's just how my mind works. But if I'm out and about, it's almost out of order always because I have that
Yeah.
little note and I'm like, oh, I got to write this down. And then I have all these notes I have to piece back together when I get to my computer.
So when you cut, okay, technically say you've written chapters 1 through 13, right? And you stop and you're going and doing something, you have these ideas, but that idea maybe it's not 14, maybe it's 1920. Do you find yourself coming and writing yourself to that 19 or 20? Or do you write 19 to 20 and then go back and fill in that part that gets you to that spot you thought of?
I will write until I get to wherever that fits because I don't know where technically 19 and 20 is.
Okay.
Because I might think that, the 3 sticky notes that I brought home are 1, 2, and 3, but they end up being 4, 17, and 9.
Yeah.
And so I just let them sit and then I go, ooh, I know where to stick that one. Okay, go get it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Again, it's always interesting to me to hear how other authors do it. I wrote all over the place, right? I wrote I wrote scenes that were much later in the book, and then went back and did some scenes earlier in the book, and then I let the story flow as I go from the scene, and then it takes you to something else. So when I write, sometimes it's really not in order, but then it goes back and kind of puts itself back together, and then you edit through it. So I always interested, but that's just how my mind works when I do it. So it's always curious how everybody does it in their way when they go through the storyline. In the book that's coming out in April 4th, you said?
Mm-hmm.
In that story, did you have a favorite scene in that book? And I always want you to answer that without giving too much away in terms of the scene.
As I mentioned before, a lot of my books are very heavy on the hurt comfort trope. So there's a lot of healing that these characters have to go through. But 2 of the men are in a relationship before the main female comes back. And there's a scene when they're facing each other lying in bed, and the most main male, his name's Griffin, he's freaking out that his boyfriend is going to leave him once the girl gets back in town, all this other stuff. And the boyfriend is like, I didn't choose you out of pity or, just to pass time or whatever. I am in love with you. And you're my heart, my soul, my everything. I love you, Griffin Solus. And the other guy's about to push back. And then he's like, you know what? No, I love you too. And it's just this sweet moment of realization of, regardless of where we end up, we both love each other.
Yeah. On the opposite side of that, is there a scene in that book that was hard, right? And it could be the emotion of the scene, or it could be just a scene that was difficult to come together for you.
There was a few scenes that the lawyer, his name's Nova, he kind of feels on the outside of things because he wants his man to get his happy ending, which is when that girl returns. That's his high school sweetheart and everything. And seeing someone on the outside trying to figure out where they fit in, and yes, it's just romance, but that's always hard to write for me because there's a lot of times where I'm on the outside looking in, trying to figure out where I fit. And the parallels aren't exactly the same, but it could be, a class. It could be a predominantly different culture, it could be foods, it could be anything, but always trying to figure out where you fit in is a reoccurring issue. And so writing Nova's part sometimes is very difficult.
Yeah, I can see that. Um, one of the questions I always like to ask as well, and this is a question really to help younger writers, right? And I always like to ask, what level of research or what research you did do. And, I asked the question because it doesn't have to be the rabbit hole kind of research where you just look at it looking. Sometimes it's just a little thing here and there that you look up for clarification, right? But it is important because it's almost guaranteed that a reader that does read your book may be the one that does know that one thing that you forgot to look up and have a little more clarification. And the thing is it may not upset them, but sometimes it takes them out of the story, right? And that the one thing you don't want to do is have the reader get taken out of the story. Sometimes they can't get back into it, right? Once you lose that connection, sometimes it's just gone, right? And I always like to bring that up just to see, because it is very interesting every time I ask this question, not only the level of research the different authors did, but what they actually did look up for their books. Because again, every book is different, every voice of the story is different. So, what kind of research did you do, or what level of research did you do for this book, or just your books in general?
So for most of my books, they are set in worlds or instances that I can skim the surface for most things, or I've made up something so I can do what I like. So for one where there was a government organization that required one of the MCs to make a program, I made up the organization so I can kind of do what I want with them. There has been some, like in some of my suspense things, I made up one of the drugs so I can do whatever, or I've made up a disorder so that my male characters can talk to the alters in their head, because I know that's not how a lot of those disorders work, but that's how I wanted it to work, so I just made something up. For some of the other things, when it comes to like criminal investigation, that's part of my background, so I didn't have to do a lot of the research. For everything else, I will research whatever needs to be in the story. So like my cafe owner, I kind of research times when people make bagels and when they start putting out the pastries. And if you're living in a smaller town, like when would they open? But in terms of how to make a latte using those really expensive machines, he just always has the latte. Yeah. Like I know it's not going to take 2 seconds to make it, but I don't need to go in to all of the steam and the this, that, and the other, because it's not in there. So I think one of the biggest things to tell new readers is to do enough research that you feel comfortable talking about it, but you don't have to go down the rabbit hole in order to be like, he made some coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And it's a good point. This is a different question. I just thought about this as you were talking about the research part of it. But do you find yourself being an author that is heavy on description, or are you very descriptive, but it's not lengthy, right? You explain it, completely, but then you move into it, where I know some authors may take a page or two to explain the room or the atmosphere as you enter. Well, where do you find yourself on that side?
Closer to less description, partly because I don't see a lot of those things in my head, and it also doesn't matter. One of the things that I've explained to some of my other author friends is that when I say a rich house, what that means to me, to you, to the person I pass on the street, it's 3 different things. So unless I have to explain to you that it is a gated community up the hill and it's got a lavish staircase, I'm not going to. It doesn't matter. I'm going to say the rich house and the long driveway. And whatever that means to you, that's great. A lot of times I won't go into like a really descriptive view of what the character looks like because it doesn't matter. I'll give you what you need. And then however you see that character, I love that for you because then that's your imagination. Some people
Yep.
don't like the way I write because of that. But I don't want to spend 50 years on what the character looks like and then you forget halfway through the book what color eyes he has because I would also forget. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm on the side with you. I same way. I don't overly describe it because I've always felt the reader's imagination will probably always be better than my description, right? Your author's description is how the author sees it, right? As they're seeing that story. But the reader has their own connection too. And I think the beauty of it sometimes, or the magic of it, is when the reader is picturing, like you said, what the rich house looks like, what the long driveway looks like, rather than you saying the front doorway was this and the entrance looked like this and the floors were made out of this. Let the reader, in their mind, what is the rich home to them? Let them picture that, right? And that story, that connection to the story, I always think is much deeper when the reader is putting those pieces together rather than sometimes the author force feeding them all those details. So I'm on your side of it. I've always thought that way too, and agree with you. In terms of what we said, we talk about maybe a couple books. Is there another book you want to kind of bring up that maybe you're working on, or maybe something that's already or is already out?
So one of the books that kind of got me into this whole publishing spiel, me and my older sister have a love for the crime documentaries a lot, and it spiraled into a book that she gave me an idea for, and it is a polycule between a serial killer, a Campbell, a cop, and a kid with multiple ulcers. And it's just a lot of craziness and twistedness, and like there's romance as well, but it's more of just unsettling, not sure what's going on, between the four, outside the four, who killed that person, and a lot of different characters. So the second book just came out a couple of days ago, and the third one is in September. And each book is just progressively darker and more twisted. And it makes me happy because then I get to go back to my sister and be like, look at this idea she gave me. Look where it's gone. So yeah. I'm very excited to, once the fourth book comes out next year, to give her the full set and be like, hey, this was your idea. This is what it made.
Is 4 books your goal and your dead set goal? Because I know sometimes as you're writing it, it may lean, and sometimes you go, there may be one more left in there, or do you know? Again, it's hard because like me, you kind of just let the story go. Do you feel 4 will be the final, or you're open to it in case it wants to go one more or so?
So I know it's 4 books. I just don't know how long each book is. So like the second book was shorter than the first one. They are named after the 4 main characters. So they kind of focus on different aspects of each of the 4. So like I know there's only 4. It's just the fourth one might be 200,000 words, or it might be 50. We have no idea.
Yeah. So you have that set coming out. You have the other 2 books coming out for that, right? So I always like to ask, what are you working on right now? And a lot of times it's a bunch of stuff at once, right? For a lot of us, it's not like one book, one story. It's a bunch of things. Maybe a short story collection, finishing a second or third book for something, starting a new series or a new storyline. What is it outside of that 4-book collection? What is it that you're kind of working on now? And again, I don't want you to give more away than you're comfortable with.
I think one of the There's actually two things that I am working on right now. So one of them is a Omegaverse series that focuses on the betas of all the packs because they always get forgotten. They don't really have a place, and it's once again those you're outside looking in. Where do I fit? So the series is called Beta Accepted, and it's all about how betas find their happy ending, but it's not because um, they just kind of gave in and chose something. It's more like a pack chooses them because they're like, you're perfect for us. And then the second series that I'm starting this summer is an all-male magic academy. So we have lots of academy romances with why choose, but there's always a female in the center. And I was like, where are all our male ones? Why? I want a male polycule. So some of my alphas, my alpha readers are helping me out. And we are constructing this world of a male polycule within a magic academy. And I'm really excited for that one, all the world building and everything.
Yeah. Speaking of world building, so this is a question I like to ask sometimes because of the world building, right? Because again, the world building sometimes takes a lot of effort, a lot of detail, a lot of essentially building to make this world from scratch. So I always like to ask the question when you're done, say with that storyline or additional stories from that, say there's multiple books. Do you feel that you may use that world again in other stories that are technically not related? And this could be very similar to like the Star Wars universe, where it's the universe, but all these different stories are a lot of them are connected, but there's also others that have nothing to do with each other, right? Marvel universe, where it's one universe, but and then sometimes the characters interact, not always. So if once you've put all that effort into building that, do you feel like you may use that at a future time for another storyline that's not related to the one you're building it for?
I haven't done it before. To me, the characters and the storyline are kind of like a puzzle where you just pack it all back up and it's in their box, and then you get the next puzzle and pull it out. And even though you're like, oh, this piece is similar, it doesn't fit to me.
Okay.
So I haven't crossed paths like that before, and a lot of my stories can't happen in the same timeline at all whatsoever. So like I'll have a Megaverse, but one will have Omegas a certain way, but in the betas stories, Omegas are different. So I couldn't have those stories overlap even if I wanted to.
Yeah.
So I usually keep series separate.
Okay. Yeah. I always love asking the question because I haven't done anything world building yet, right? And don't know if I will. So I'm always curious when an author does do that, where they will take it, because I know there's a lot of effort into making or building those worlds out. Because a lot of times you're doing it from scratch, right? You may use a foundation of something, but you are essentially building it from scratch from that point.
Yeah.
The other question I like to ask is similar to a like a bucket list question as a writer, right? And is there something that when you would look back on towards the end of your writing career, years in the future, is there something you want to make sure that you do at some point, right? And it could be something as simple as there's a genre you love that you don't write in and haven't attempted, but maybe one day you're like, I want to try that. I want to write something in that, or a storyline that you may be interested in, but you're like, I'm not ready to tackle that storyline yet, but you do want to do it at some point. Is there something in your writing career, kind of like a bucket list item, that you have thought of? And the answer could be you haven't thought of it, but is there something in the back of your mind that you're like, I do want to do this someday?
One of the things that I have been thinking about is there's the one series or book that everybody, when they're younger, they read, it stays with them, and sometimes they'll even go back and reread it. And I would love to construct something similar which would it be different than what I currently write? And it could be something that a lot of the kids, young adults pick up, and that's the book that they're like, this made my childhood.
Yep.
Not exactly sure what I would want to do in terms of genre and story, but being part of a kid's childhood would make me so happy.
Yep. Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. Because, like you said, we all have that book or series that basically, you know, sucked us into this world of reading or writing. And that was the one that just said, nah, you love this. You love doing this. And you'll always remember it. So I can see where you're going with that. Um, the collection would be the crime for the 4 books. Do you have kind of a set release date that you want to do this? Like you want to release book 4 by end of next year or within a couple of years, or are you just going to let it kind of go as you're doing them?
I'm going to let it kind of stew and figure it out. I want to let it happen organically. I don't want to feel like I have to push it out. But my ideas usually come pretty fast. So when I start thinking about something, I've probably got anywhere between a few weeks and a few months before it's like, hey, write me. I'm ready.
Yeah. The only other question I have for you, because it's something newer, is the whole playlist with the books. Have you found yourself doing that with your books? Is it something you've offered or something you're planning on doing maybe in the future? I haven't done it, but I do. I love the idea of it, and I understand the correlation between the two.
So the reason I don't do it is because I am not only a chaos writer, but I also am complete chaos in everything. So if I were to make a playlist based on what I was listening to per chapter, it could be anything from classical to screamo. I don't know what fits with my chapters. And it could be like a lovey-dovey chapter and I was listening to screamo. I have no idea. So
yeah,
that stresses me out to make a playlist because I have no idea. It might be something I try in the future, but for now, I can't.
Yeah, I can understand that too because I'm also all over the place. That maybe that's why I haven't done it either because I was like, I technically I'm not listening. I write horror, right? I write a lot of horror stuff, but I may not be listening to something that fits with that when I'm doing it. It's just I listen to whatever I like or whatever could be on at the moment. I say, okay, that makes sense. I can just keep writing to this. So I do understand where you're coming from for that because what works in our head definitely or probably will not work for the readers that are listening and trying to read it also. Is there anything else you want to let the viewers know about your books, about what you have coming up, any special things that you have coming up that you want them to look out for?
Not really. I have a few signings that I'm going to this year. I'm going to Romanticon in Connecticut in July. And then I will be at Books and Bourbon in October in Kentucky.
Okay.
But other than that, I mean, there's always books to read. I always put out books every, other month or so, every couple of months. So there's always something new to read.
Okay. And do you have a website where they find all this, or was it on your Amazon author page, or?
They can go to the Amazon author page, or they can go to my site as well. It's tipofslater.com.
Okay. And I just want to remind the viewers that I will leave all the links below for Ann Slater, website, socials, links for books, whatever she wants to put on there for you guys to be able to find her. And definitely, if you have a comment for either of us or a question, definitely leave that below. We'd love to read that and answer you if we can. And, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications so you don't miss all these amazing authors that I have coming up. I want to thank you for coming on today. This was a pleasure chatting with you, talking about your works, how you work through everything, and what you have planned for the future.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then in the future when you have some other stuff coming out, let's definitely maybe get you back on again so we can talk about some of your new stuff you're releasing.
Definitely.
Thank you, viewers, for watching as well. Goodbye.